everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Hoopslink podcast. My name is Daniel Carlin, your host here with me. Very special guest of mine, Jared Wilson, one of the co-captains at Westmont College in 2014, 2015, what we think is the greatest Westmont College team of all time. Since then, it has gone on and devoted himself to strength and conditioning, opening up a gym in Ventura, worked with a bunch of different guys, and so really excited to have you and your expertise on the show today. So, Jared, welcome to the pod.
I appreciate you having me on. It's an honor to be on here. We are the best team in Westmont history. There's no other team that had a 6'9" Australian, so good luck running him down low.
And it was a squad for sure. I tried to get Coach Moore to claim us as the number one. We got top four. I think he was afraid of hurting some feelings, but I think deep down inside we know we take the cake. So man, really excited to have you on. You know, for anyone that's been listening to the last couple of episodes, we've got different skills trainers, different coaches that we talk about. You know, what's the separator needed for guys, whether it's someone trying to make a high school team, obviously collegiate team, even beyond that. And the thing it always comes down to is strength and conditioning. And so I think a lot of players coming up kind of overlook it. I think there's maybe some myths about strength and conditioning with youth athletes that are floating around, and maybe some people are worrisome. But for me, it's obvious that, you know, it's the number one thing that could be done to help athletes, whether it's be ready for varsity at the high school level, obviously to make college, and play even beyond that. Excited to kind of discuss that with you and break some of that down as to that development piece and where guys can really grow. I know you've worked with obviously a lot of, you know, youth, high school, into kind of collegiate level, but definitely some NBA guys as well that I'm sure our listeners would be interested in. John Wall, who just retired the other day, you know, one of the most exciting college players of all time at Kentucky. Working with Rui Hachimura right now, and just spent some time over in Japan. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that trip to Japan and you know, what it kind of entails getting NBA guys ready for the season coming up?
Man, yeah, I've been fortunate enough, and I try to show a lot of gratitude for my ability to work with pros. You know, not everybody gets that opportunity. I've kind of been on the path of, you know, the old saying, if you never know who's watching, and I've been in opportunities where I just kind of do my job, and then I'm approached by people to work with their guys, and I, you know, do my absolute best job with every kid to professional athlete I have, and it's worked out for me. So, but I am fortunate to be able to travel with some of these guys, which been trying to explain to my wife, you know, the experience, and it's hard to explain. I was fortunate enough to go to Japan with Rui, who people don't know. I want to say he's not the only active Japanese NBA player, because you have a guy, Yuki. I think he's a
Yeah,
point guard for the whatever,
yeah,
but I forget what team he's on now, the Grizzlies maybe. But he's like the most successful Japanese player. And to go to Japan with him, it's basically what you would imagine. He's like, you know, he's like the LeBron of Japan. So it was absolutely amazing. The part that people don't understand is it's not a luxury when it comes to my side of things, the training. Because people think when you think of professional athlete, you think of the nicest facility, the nicest equipment, the nicest this, the nicest that. I could send you a video or put pictures of like where we trained. Like one was in his like dressing room, and I had to bring stuff to be able to then train him to prepare him off our progression for the off season, not just the camp, what we were doing. I think every workout was done at a hotel gym. Um, so it's not like pretty from my side of things, but that's what you know, it's leading to some of these youth kids. It's like they don't have the nicest equipment all the time. You have to be able to understand what you need to accomplish in order to keep pushing them, whether it's to stay healthy, whether it's to push performance, whether it's to just get what we need to get in. And that's what we do. And that's basically my job, is to be able to then implement the things I need to for him. But yeah, man, the trip to Japan is amazing. I always, I don't talk a whole lot about it all the time, because I don't know, I feel kind of weird, because it's like I was fortunate enough to be invited and go with him. I didn't
yeah,
pay for anything. So
yeah.
it's like, you know, it's his trip. So it's like, I don't always talk about his trip, but I like to just say I'm very fortunate that I get those type of opportunities. I'm very grateful for them, and I learn a lot and I grow a lot within those kind of opportunities.
Yeah, man, that's awesome. And trying to follow along on Instagram, just kind of taking in some of the culture and then seeing some of the behind the scenes stuff was awesome to see. Obviously, I mean, if you got a guy that's flying you out now, granted these guys are NBA and their contracts are pretty nice,
Pretty nice.
but when yeah, when I mean, you think about like the pros at the top level, right? How they're taking care of their bodies. For a guy that's in the off season, this is what I always try to tell my younger guys is, I guess there's that saying of like, like dress for the job you want, or kind of act in the manner of the job you want. It's like, all right, well, if you want to kind of reach for the stars up here, right? Like if you try to prepare yourself as if you were going to be an NBA player, right? You probably make a pretty good high school basketball player. You probably have a pretty good chance of playing collegiately. And so for those guys, whether it's a guy like Rui, a guy like John Wall, and when you're traveling with them and they're trying to take care of their body from the preparation of some of the on-court stuff, the strength conditioning, the recovery, the nutrition. I mean, can you just give us a little bit of a kind of a snapshot into what it looks like when you're traveling around with these pros and how they're taking care of their bodies?
Yeah. So John, my role with him was a little bit different. I was his head of performance, so I managed everything underneath the performance umbrella, which did include like skill development. Um, and so Rui is a little bit more. I'm like his performance coach, and so I wouldn't say I have less of a hand in things, but with John, it was like full spectrum, so he's a little easier to talk about. But yeah, I mean, when you look at the big rocks of performance and things that my youth, high school, and college kids that I try to communicate with them is there are big rocks, and they are the ones that seem the silliest and the ones that I'm going to tell you, and you're going to be like, I'm not going to do that. Number one, sleep. Getting quality sleep is the most important for recovery. And typically how I approach sleep is try to find a bedtime that's the same every night. Again, seems silly. Why does that matter? It has a huge importance on your recovery and your circadian rhythm and all those type of things. But it's simple. Try to go to bed at the same time every night. And then, the typical thing, try to get 7 to 9 hours. But trying to go to bed at the same night every night is something that every kid can take, whether it's 11 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 12 o'clock, whatever. Try to find a good bedtime. Uh, on top of that, usually protein. Most athletes don't get enough of it. So I would have supplements with me, whether it's just a simple protein powder, simple protein snacks like Greek yogurt, just things like that, because we want to make sure that we're hitting that protein marker. Uh, Most of my athletes are, a simple way to do it is basically like your grams and your body weight in grams of protein. So if you're 200 pounds, trying to get about 200 grams of protein. Um, there's other calculations, but that's like the simplest one that I follow that most guys can understand. Then on top of that is really just understanding their schedule, whether it's games, whether it's practice, and then just really being on a routine of what's most important throughout the week. So are you checking the box of strength? Are you checking the box of general health, which for me a lot of times is like tendon health, so isometrics and things of that nature. Um, Conditioning, like are you underprepared or overprepared? Because both those things exist within sport.
Yeah,
Easy way for basketball players to think about it, which NBA does, is high minute guys versus low minute guys, which most high school kids and college kids have zero concept of. Like we didn't
yeah,
do it at Westmont, but now that I think
yeah,
about it, we should have. If you don't
yeah,
play in games, the next day you're playing in a live game with the other guys that didn't play in games and then like your support staff, because you have to be able to get that conditioning, that time on your legs. So if you are called upon, you're actually prepared to like play in a game and not, put yourself at risk. Uh, those type of things. And then just a constant, back and forth conversation with the actual human, John, in that case, of like, how are you feeling? And you can learn a lot about someone by just having a normal human connection with them. I lived in his house for 2.5 years. I was full time with him. So like I could see when he walked in the gym, like, hey, this is a terrible day. I could see when his mannerisms were off. I could see how the way he was walking. But just, simple things like that you can start to really understand an athlete. And you want to just try to find those big rocks. So sleep, nutrition, hydration, and then your routine from a performance perspective and a skill perspective, and then play perspective. Like, and then bucketing those and understanding what needs to be filled, what needs to be lowered, and balancing all that throughout a season or off season.
Yeah, I mean, great stuff, and a lot of it is simple things that everyone can achieve that you don't need necessarily, NBA money to go to bed at the same time. I think that idea of kind of load management and the high minutes, low minutes. I remember I had a coach who went back and played in Australia, Kevin Brooks, who played in the NBA, and he was saying that when he got there, he was one of the bench guys. He was like the 11th, 12th guy, and he hadn't played in like a month, and he'd just been hanging out. And one day the coach grabbed him by the jersey and put it in, and he was like, no, and trying to go up and down for a couple of minutes, and he was absolutely gassed. And but obviously the NBA schedule's maybe a little bit different to kind of a high school or a college schedule, but still that same idea that I think people get into that mindset of, oh, it's all the same, and if we're in season, so I'm going to take it light. And I know I have conversations with some of my guys in the weight room, like, hey, if you haven't played more than 5 minutes in the past like month, like when you come in here, like you could lift heavy, you could get after it, like you could try to grow and build a little bit. Some of that stuff on just like the protein and the nutrition. And we might touch on some of the stuff a little bit later, but I always recommend, like, hey, do you guys got to get in the weight room, like you had like strength conditioning, whether it's with us, someone else in the off season, just make sure it's getting done. But if you're going to put time and resources into that, I mean, for like high school kids, like a school lunch is like a slice of cheese pizza. And I'm like, all right, like if you try to perform at a high level and you add a slice of cheese pizza, and then maybe you got some Cheetos, you got like a chocolate milk, your body is not going to be ready to go, and you're going to fall apart. So I think those are all great. The rocks or the buckets that you talked about that anyone on any level can really try to apply. One thing, I mean, working with some of these top guys, right? I think like basketball players hear it a lot where they're like, if you want to shoot like Steph Curry, you don't just start by jacking threes, right? And so, for the guys that are, whether it's the NBA, I mean, whether you look at some of like these high level collegiate guys, I mean, you look at some of the dudes who are in like the SEC or the Big 12, and you look at like physically, kind of just what they are, right? It's kind of a huge step away from a lot of high school guys. But just any college player in general, there's this big step up. So if you talk about like, all right, if you want to shoot like Steph Curry, you got to start with form shooting. You got to work your way out. You got to build your rhythm, right? What does that look like for strength conditioning? If I'm someone in middle school, high school, it's the first time I'm kind of stepping into doing some strength conditioning stuff. What does that baseline and foundation look for me, and where should I begin?
I might go off a tangent here because I just had a meeting with one of my guys, and this is like kind of what we were talking about. I think I try to make it as simple as possible because I do work with a lot of youth and high school and college kids, and I think when you make something a little bit too complex, like I do for my NBA guys, because a lot of stuff I do for my NBA guys, I do behind the scenes. And I make it very simple for them, probably similar to the way you coach. Like the concepts that you have in your head, you have to be able to communicate those so a kid can kind of understand them so they could do them better, not just like, hey, do this drill. And they're like, well, why am I doing this drill? So the way I think about it is two things, especially basketball or most sports, but this is a basketball podcast. So basketball, there's two components, skill and physical ability. Okay. So I would actually argue, and I think Steph's trainer said that the weight room is more important than shooting. He's like, there's like a viral clip of Steph shooting coach.
Wow.
I would, I would argue against that at times because skill is king. We've both met people that are like extremely jacked and athletic and whatever, but they can't play freaking basketball.
All right.
And they're never going to play basketball.
Yeah.
But you've met it's hard to find someone that's not super skilled, but like so skill is very important. And so I
Yeah.
never want to get that confused. And I've probably had 5 athletes in my career thus far that I've actually had them come to the weight room less than they actually develop their skill. Because if you're already jumping 40 inches and are strong, but you can't, and you're a big, and like you would know, like you can't make a simple right hand layup and a left hand layup at a
Yeah.
90% clip as you're training on the court. Well, what the heck are we doing? Like, you're never going to get the
Right.
ball. Like,
Yeah.
so that's where I start. Like, I'll talk to my athletes about like like where is your basketball skill at? Part of that is because I played basketball in college and I've been around the highest level guys now. So it's like I see where that comes into play. Outside of that, though, if it is a kid that like, and most youth and high school kids need physical development, I think the way I start is I understand their schedule first, because looking at the human is very important. It's been very famous in the NBA. Guys lift on game days. Why do they lift on game days? Because they have a game day schedule. They play 3.5 games per week, every week for the entire season, pretty much. So then you look at like a stress model, high and low. So that's why we lift on game days, because we make your game day your highest level of stress possible. Then the next day could be recovery. Now, most high schools are actually practice models. Their practices are the hardest part of their week. And I mean, obviously, you guys know, like all of a sudden the game comes and you blow a team out by 50. So you can start to understand, like, okay, I have, even if it's in season, I have 8 weeks right here where we don't really play any competition. Like our league's not that good or whatever. It's nothing's really hard right now. So I'm going to use these 8 weeks to develop physical qualities that will set you up then for CIF or for state or for whatever it is. And then where we start that for me is that we go through, we have a pretty extensive evaluation process that we go through. We use force plates. A lot of it's my objective eyes, my coaching eye that I go through with guys. Obviously, one that I skipped, obviously, is injury history. I'm sure your athletes, every skill trainer on here, their guys complain about their knees hurting. So my biggest thing I tell all my guys is that you feeling healthy is the number one performance enhancer. Because if you don't feel good, your knees hurt every time you jump. Well, you're not going to perform at the level that you probably could if your knees didn't hurt. So generally, we'll have that conversation. Like, is there anything in the last 6 months to a year that's been bugging you, whether it's a sprained ankle, whether it's a knee, whether it's a hip, a back, whatever? Most guys have something. So we'll address that right away. We'll clean that up. We'll fix that. I could usually, for your basketball guys, like Jake Torah is the absolute GOAT of tendon health. The guy's like dedicated his whole life to tendons. So he's like the guru when it comes to tendon health. So most basketball guys will start with tendon health. I'll give you Jake Torah's knee thing right now for listeners. Basically, foam rolling around the quad stretching, some simple hip mobility. And the 4 major rocks are a wall sit, which every person has access to. 5 sets, 30 to 45 seconds. The second one is a hamstring hip bridge, which you could Google. You could do it on a foam roller. Then you go split squat iso. All of my basketball guys have to do a split squat iso for 3 minutes. If you've ever tried that, that is really freaking hard to do. And that's like your knee 2 inches off the ground, solid posture upright, 3 minutes straight. If you can't do 3 minutes straight, work till you can get 3 minutes straight. And then those are like the big three. 90% of basketball players, when they actually do that every single day, knee pain goes away. And then from there, we start to understand, okay, this athlete needs this. And then we just start to progress through that. I think basketball guys get a little bit averted from the weight room because they think it's going to affect their core. That's the farthest thing from the truth. But if that's the case, well, I'm going to start you relatively easy. Again, I'm going to work backwards. Say you gave me 8 weeks. Okay, well, the first 2 weeks, I would call them learn weeks. So I'm going to teach you how to squat, how to lunge, how to hinge, how to push, how to pull, how to carry, how to brace, all these, simple things that, me and you did through college and most people can do. But I'm going to do it, at body weight, and I'm going to do it with extensive tempos. So I'm going to have you go down 3 to 5 seconds, hold it at the bottom 3 to 5 seconds, and stand up 3 to 5 seconds. on pretty much every single movement because it starts to create some motor learning and control of your body that now you know how to squat the right way, lunge the right way. The next 4 weeks will basically just intensify. So we'll take everything that we taught and we'll start to add load to that. Usually by the end of those 6 weeks, now guys are bought in because what they can see, start to see muscles in the mirror. They can start to feel it on the court a little bit. And so now they're like, let's freaking go. Let's lift. Let's get after it. And then we'll start to, increase that intensity. What I want people to take away from it is very simple. People try to overcomplicate it. I think I just did a podcast the other day. I think one of the biggest problems is guys see what the pros do. LeBron just went viral for doing some like crazy sumo squat deadlift thing.
Yeah.
And they think they have to do that. It's not the case, man. Most of these kids need basic strength, squat, lunge, hinge, push, pull, because they get so much from basketball, dynamic actions, jumping, landing, that if we just give them just enough, and then we address any injuries or issues that they have structurally, that's all they really need. The problem is they don't want to do it.
Yeah.
The flip side of that is if you could give me consistently 2 days a week throughout the entire year, I guarantee you will jump higher, you will feel better on the court, and you'll be more athletic. Because, especially high school, because you go through puberty, you have hormonal changes, testosterone goes up. Then you start to, your body starts to change and you're like, holy moly, this is crazy. It's not rocket science, but I think the problem is people don't do it consistently. They take too long of breaks. So in season comes, well, I'm not going to work out anymore. Okay, well, you just didn't work out for 4 months. That's a long time. You've detrained yourself. So your next starting point is lower than what it should be. And I think those are some like the biggest things that these kids either get wrong or they just don't understand is that one, it doesn't have to be a crazy hard. 2, progressive, just simple progressions. And 3, consistency over time and work hard. And that's it. I'll give you an example. I don't think me and John worked out more than 45 minutes every day. And I want to say on average, we worked out trained hard 30 minutes a day because that's all you really need. I mean, again, another example for people is like after you're done on the court, if you walk straight into the weight room and do a pretty heavy goblet squat with some tempo, you do some type of hinge movement like a single leg RDL, and you do some lunging and you do a dumbbell press and a chin up. Man, high school kids, you could run that for 6 to 8 weeks and just get a little bit heavier each time. You'll get stronger. It's really that simple. It's really just understanding the simplicity of it and building it within your routine of what you did. So yeah, I mean, and like it's what you said. Like the first thing I ask all my clients really is what's your end goal? If you tell me NBA, sweet, I've worked in the NBA for 4 years. I'm going to hold you to that standard. And when I do hold you to that standard and you don't appreciate it and you get mad, then I'm going to be able to have a nice conversation with you about, look, your standard isn't where you're saying. I want to be a really good high school basketball player. Sweet. Like those are 2 different things. But I'm going to hold you to that standard because there also has to be an enjoyment around playing sport. Like playing basketball is one of the funnest things in the world. Yeah. But if I treat everybody like they're going to be in the NBA, well, there's probably 5 or 6 kids on every roster that are like, dude, this guy is out of control. He is nuts. I do not want to play for him. He just yells at us all the time.
Yeah.
But if I have 2 kids that are like, hey, my goal is the NBA or high level D1, well, their standard is a little bit different than these guys. It doesn't mean that I'm treating them technically different, but, oh, you want to skip a lift? No, you're not skipping this lift. Oh, you want to do that's where that comes into play. They're still going to do the same work, but it's, man, like you can't say you want to go to the NBA or play at a high level D1, but you're the one skipping this. You're the one not taking care of your nutrition. You're the one staying up all night. That doesn't work. Your actions aren't telling me what you're actually doing. And that's, again, that's education around that. And if kids can start to understand that, they have a lot more success and then they start to buy in.
Yeah, no, I agree with all those sentiments. I think that consistency piece is huge. I think with that idea or kind of myth about you shouldn't be lifting around, game days because then it's going to have some impact on your performance. I think the problem with basketball now, and especially when it comes to that, is if you play basketball all year round, where you're AAU and high school, it's like, well, you play some fall games, then you play the season, and the season's kind of heavy November through February, maybe into March if you make a real deep run. And then come the spring, you've got AAU. And then in June, you probably hit some high school basketball. And then all of a sudden, you're back in AAU for July and maybe some of August. And so you just played all year round. And you're like, oh, well, I've got this big tournament coming up, so I'm not going to lift. Or, oh, well, now season started, so I'm not going to lift. And like you said, like we don't know, the first time you get in the weight room after lifting and you haven't done it for a while, you wake up the next day, sometimes a couple of days, you're like, man, like I'm sore. Like you do some legs and then you go to sit down, like it hurts, and then we go, oh, this is like I'm gonna feel bad playing, so I'm just not gonna lift. Whereas, like you said, 2 times a week, get in and just stay consistent, right? Then you can kind of pick those times. I'm
Not to
interested.
cut you off, not to cut you
Yeah.
off, but the biggest, I talk about this a lot with my other buddy. The reason why I say consistency is exactly that reason. Everybody knows, pretty much everybody, because every high school kid has at least gone to the gym and done bench press. My chest is
Yeah.
so sore. I can't shoot. That soreness goes away after 3 to 4 weeks because your body starts to adapt. Then you start to prescribe the right stimulus. You have a progressive overload, and now it's part of your routine. That's why I say when you take these gaps, every time you come back to it, you're right back to day one, and you're sore as can be. Basketball stinks, but every athlete that I have that trains consistently, they are rarely sore, and if they are, it's like a good sore. It's
Yeah.
like that was a good workout. I feel good, and that's like a huge thing for kids to try to understand is that when you train really hard in the off season and then you go in season and you stop training, you're going back to day one when that season's over, and you're going to feel terrible for 4 more weeks. And there's never a right time to start, but the faster you can start, the faster you can start to progress, and the faster it becomes part of your routine, and so forth and so forth and so forth. And that's, kids have to understand that, or any athlete has to understand that. That's just part of your routine.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's what we try to talk to our kids all the time, and even when we get to season, that's we try to find at least 2 days a week where even if it's coming in at some mobility stuff, it's maybe the same lifts, a little bit lighter, but just to kind of keep the body moving, keep it active, kind of keep the habits there as well of just getting into the weight room and being familiar there. Uh, Obviously, you work with a lot of guys that are playing high school basketball that play some AAU right now. I'm always interested when I kind of think about the calendar year. A lot of times people talk about like a lot of the Achilles injuries that are happening in the NBA, and they say, "Oh, it's because people play too much," or all this and all that. I've often thought about if I was trying to develop the best high school player possible and what that calendar would look like, and as far as obviously strength and conditioning, where it would come into that. With I guess kind of major seasons being the high school season, November games start through to usually sometime in February, AU and summer basketball kind of I guess April, into June, mid July. What is do you either have an idea of what a great calendar would look like as to when guys should go and lift heavy and how many times a week? Is it just kind of based on the player? How would you try to counsel or coach someone if they were trying to plan out a year, they were playing high school, they were playing AU, and they said, what am I going to do for this year to build my strength and conditioning? How would you help or how would you schedule that player to reach their goals?
Yeah. So again, this is what me and my buddy, I'm coming out with a educational piece on this. A lot of people talk about it. It's huge in the NBA, workload management. Kawhi made it famous, sitting out games, all that stuff. Everybody's heard about that. I don't think a lot of people really understand what it means, and not everybody in like the pro world or whatever, but like your average everyday parent or athlete. Like, well, what does that even mean? Why is it doing that? Well, again, you have to try to understand like the human first. And I say that all the time because like when you're an athlete, you don't think about that. I never thought about that. But like you said, I've been through 3 surgeries now and my back and my hip are still messed up. Why was that? Because I used to basketball all day, every day. No one could tell me different. I would get my lifts in. I would just put my body through the ringer. Now that I'm like a step back and I'm actually in this world, to try to keep it simple, I would probably say 3 things without actually thinking about the calendar. Number one, finding gaps of time where you actually take time off. Now, when I say time off, that doesn't mean that you can't play basketball. And I think that's what a lot of people get confused when I say that or talk to parents about. I think, again, talking about skill and physical qualities. I think one of the biggest problems, and again, I'm not a skill trainer, I think one of the biggest problems is kids just train hard to train hard. I think RIP Kobe Bryant, I think he kind of made that popular with the Mamba mentality. But I tell all my kids, if you actually watched Kobe work out, because I've studied him a lot, he would shoot 1,000 elbow jumpers. Then he would shoot 1,000 right foot jab elbow jumpers. Then he would shoot a reverse pivot elbow jumper. So if you watched him work out, or Steph, or any of these guys now, these kids watch, you would be like, that's the most boring workout ever. That is skill development. I've listened to Drew Halen talk a lot about Jason Tatum's development. When you look at skill development, and again, this is during breaks of time. This is my first point. You should be able to objectively go to your head coach, what can I work on? 1 or 2 things that'll help me next season or help me become a starter or help me get more minutes. Every head coach will have those things for those individual players. That during those breaks of time, that is what you should be working on. And you should be working on developing that skill, which means that most times you're not just working. Skill development happens when you're relatively fresh and you don't have fatigue. So with whatever that is, whether it's ball handling, shooting, any of those things. And then during those gaps, 1, health. So do you have some nagging things that have been bugging you? Let's get those fixed. I have a bunch of resources that I personally use, but PTs are great. And then what I do, right? So if it's something that I can't do, I'll refer to a PT. We need to fix this issue. We need to fix it very fast. As soon as that issue's fixed, then let's train. So that's like number 1 is finding within your calendar year, when are the least important times that you can take 4 to 8 weeks, 2 different times, ideally away from each other, that you can really work on skill development and you can really work on physical development. Now, what does that do? So then when you go back into your season, or whether it's AAU or high school, you've now built routine. So now you don't get that soreness. Now you can create the consistency, and now you can create more of that kind of longevity projection. Because what I always talk about with all my kids is that you can't talk to a college until June 15th of I believe it's your junior year, or your sophomore, going into your junior year.
Yep.
I tell all my kids, I don't care what you look like as a freshman or sophomore. If a coach happens to give you some feedback through a head coach, you better bet your butt that you are developing that skill, or whether it's get bigger shot, like you should be developing that. So when they see you the next time, 1, that kid's coachable. And 2, okay, I see that kid's working his butt off. Maybe now we'll give him an offer. And that's happened to one of my athletes, Dylan Benner, who's playing at West Point now, Army. Same thing happened to him. Coach told him, he's like, man, you really need to fix your knees and you need to get a little bit bigger. We did both those things in like a 3-month time period. Army came and watched him next time, and he got an offer and is playing there now. But like, those are huge things you have to do. And then on top of that is just, I think those are probably the 2 biggest things, is finding time within your year that you can take time off, which is then hyper focusing on what do I need to get better at and my physical qualities and health. Then those times of year give you that gap to build the routine to then be able to take throughout the entire year. And it's like the compound interest, it's like I always talk about it. If it's 2 times a week for 52 weeks, that's 108 days training sessions, something like that. I'm not
Yeah.
good at math.
Yeah.
But if you take the 6 months off or 4 months off per season, subtract that compared to a kid that's doing that, that's a lot of extra work that kid got. Whether it's a 20 or 30-minute session, you're left behind, my man. Like it's just the way it goes. And so, yeah, I mean, that's probably the biggest thing that I try to educate parents on. I mean, you probably deal with it all the time. It's like parents are like, well, my kid's got to play on this AAU team. He's got to do this. He's got to do that. My number one question for every basketball player I have, and it's hilarious when you ask it to them because their jaw drops and they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, what did you get better at this offseason that's going to translate to next year? They're like, well, what do you mean? I'm like, what'd you get better at? And they're like, well, I worked out a lot. I'm like, okay, like, did you become a better shooter? Did you like get better on the ball? Did you get better at like, what did you get better at? And they're like,
Yeah.
oh, I don't really know. And it's like, man, when you go to the NBA, talk about the NBA. Use Rui as an example. At his camp, Phil Handy asked him in front of the whole camp, like, how many dribbles do you get? Rui's like, I'm lucky if I get three. He plays with LeBron and Luka, obviously. So
Yeah.
you have to figure out how to score efficiently. How many kids in the AAU world can score off two dribbles at an 80% clip?
Yeah.
Not
Not a
many.
lot.
They probably couldn't do it 80% in a workout.
Yeah.
And that's what I try to talk to these kids about. And they're always like, what do you, I'm like, that's why I'm not a skill trainer, because I think I wouldn't have any clients because they'd be like, what are we doing? But like the way I approach skill now is the same way I approach strength. Like we have to get better at something, like, and be able to do it confidently. So then when you're in a game, there's a reason why Kobe would go to the mid post or the elbow. He's going to make that 50% of the time because he's freaking practices so many times. And that's just, and that's kind of how I look at it all the time. Is like, just simplify it, be able to do it at a high level and be really efficient. It doesn't have to be pretty. Like the pretty stuff comes down the line just because you've put the hours in. But like, you go back and watch Steph in college, like he was hitting threes. He wasn't doing all of his crazy stuff he does
Yeah.
now, but he was
Yeah.
really efficient and he can make it. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's great. I mean, that's as a head coach of a program, a lot of that is music to my ears. As far as if someone comes up and says, "Coach, like what, like this spring, what do I need to do? Like what, I want to start next year. What has to happen for me to do that? What can I get better at?" And then I think you're right. A lot of kids train to train, and I think a lot of kids as well. I had this conversation with my team today. The idea of just like being in the gym versus deep practice. I said, we had a workout this morning. It was about an hour and a half, and I watched some guys kind of just, walk around, shoot shots at 75%. Didn't really make any mistakes, but didn't do anything they could actually do in a game. And then I watched another handful of guys go 100%, make the mistake, lose the ball, maybe not hit as many shots, but I went, all right, those guys can come and play for me. I know that kid, maybe he's not ready now, but if he keeps training like that in a year, like he's good. And maybe that kid's better over there right now, but he won't be in 6 months because of what you're talking about. That progressive build up. If you got the same time, you put in 100%, and the other guy puts in 75%. Well, if you get 25% better each and every single workout, right, then obviously you're going to make a big jump. And then of course, if you're not working out, if you're not doing those things, then that gap gets even bigger. With some of this stuff, so when I have guys that come into my program as freshmen, sometimes I hear either them or usually their parents talk about like, oh, we don't go in the weight room because it's going to stunt their growth and all these kind of things. And whilst I mean, maybe I don't know about like doing Olympic lifting in like 6th grade, but as far as kind of like where to start or how to start, we talked about some of that basic stuff coming in, like learning the lift. But when do you think is a good time if you've got a kid that has aspirations of being a high level athlete, of whether it's playing varsity at high school, whether it's playing college, if they're really serious about it, when should they think about trying to step into a weight room and doing some of the stuff that we've been talking about?
Yeah. So I mean, the stunt growth thing, I could send you a ton of research now. It's a complete myth. It still cracks me up to this day because I have parents all the time that's the thing they always ask me. I don't even really try to answer it anymore because I'm not like a scientist, but like I have saved articles on my phone that are like, look, this has been researched. It's not true. Where I usually start with I mean, I have just tonight, I had 3 7-year-olds in here. So how I usually approach it with parents is it's not age, it's maturity. Can your kid listen, want to learn, and like work hard? Those are the only things. Because if they don't listen, then I'm basically a babysitter, and that's not what I do. Uh, if they don't want to work hard, then they're probably better off just going and running and playing at the park, which they might be better off anyways because kids need to play more. Uh,
Yeah, for sure.
it's like, and it's to me, it's way more maturity.
Mm.
And I don't know if parents don't like to hear that or not, but like that's like parents all the time DM me and be like, "Hey, how old does my kid have to be?" And all I respond is, "I don't care about age. I care about maturity. You know your kid better than anybody. If they can listen, if they can work hard, and they can pay attention to details, they're welcome in my facility." Um, but that development spectrum changes based off age. So, like my 7-year-olds that I had in here tonight, a lot of it is based around play because you want it to be, fun, a great experience, so it can become part of their routine. So, like, I mean, we were throwing med balls around, we were doing somersaults, we were doing cartwheels, we were doing crawling patterns, we were jumping on boxes, and then 20-ish minutes of it was learning, where we're teaching you how to squat, teaching you how to do a lunge, how to like these, movement patterns that, nowadays you could just kind of Google. But when they're younger, I think it has to be fun. You have to explore movement that they don't see because, like what you said earlier, with these, Achilles and these things that we're starting to see, a lot of it comes from early specialization. A lot of that comes from, I think, pressure, outside pressure, parents wanting their kid to be really good. Johnny started specializing at 5 years old because he wants to be the next Steph Curry. Well, they don't play like, I grew up playing soccer, baseball, football in the streets, monkey bars, like all these things. Kids, I mean, the reality is it's sad, but like kids don't do that as much anymore. And so like that's my development early on is like trying to get that back. Like again, doing cartwheels, doing, somersaults and backward rolls and just a variety of movements. So they're getting that outside of just basketball. Because basketball, that's the other part that sometimes when I look at kids in basketball is like less structure, more play. Like do some like 360 layups, land different ways, like do some crazy stuff just to like expose the body to different positions and patterns that they don't ever see from just, your basic, typical things.
Yeah.
Then you progress through that phase. And my progression is again, it's all based on maturity of the athlete. Like I have, I'm trying to remember his age now, 12-year-old that can he front squats like 75 pounds, easy, clean, perfect form, all the way up, all the way down, no problem. So it's all based on the individual. And it's, again, it's the progression is based on, again, a kid's maturity. So their attention to detail, the proficiency in movement, how does it look? How does it feel? That's my checklist. And then again, I communicate with the athletes. So all of our kids, like a simple progression that I can walk you through, all of our kids start with uh, body weight squat, hands out in front. They start with a really slow tempo. Once they can do that, they're going to go to a goblet squat. So now they're going to hold a dumbbell right in front of them. They're going to start with 10 pounds. The tempos are beneficial for, all the sciencey reasons, time under tension, all that kind of stuff. On top of
Yeah.
that, though, more for your listeners and like basketball players to understand and keep it simple, is it really shows their maturity. Because if I tell you you have to go 3 seconds down, 3 seconds at the bottom, and 3 seconds up, and then I turn around and you're just like this, Well, you're not being coachable. You're not listening. You're not understanding what I'm saying. Maybe I explained it poorly. Let me try to explain it again. Let me show you how it's supposed to be. The kids that lock in and do it perfect, they're the kids that progress. They're the kids that go
Yeah.
from a goblet squat all the way up to the 60-pound dumbbell goblet squat. That might be 6 months right there.
Yeah.
They're going to go to a front squat. They're going to go with a barbell here now. We're going to go zombie style to start, arms straight out in front. Then we're going to get into a regular front squat. And then we're going to kind of cycle through that deload. But that's for every exercise. And so again, to answer the question, there's no perfect starting point. It's understanding your kid and their maturity level. It's finding a trainer that's like actually, certified or has some type of backing to know what they're actually doing and they don't hurt your kid. That
Yeah.
to me is probably what scares me the most with some of these youth kids is like parents just throw them into this like trainer that like does all this kind of fancy crazy stuff and they don't do any of the basic stuff. Then you get to high school and you're like, you're not even that strong, dude, but you've been training for 5 years. What have you been doing?
Yeah.
That's what I deal with all the time. As the kids come in, they're like, I could do all this stuff. And I'm like, cool, show me a squat. And like their back's rounded like that. They have no body control. I'm like, okay, dude, like you wasted so much of your time. So it's just like the progressive development of a youth athlete is very simple. I always tell kids to motivate them is like, hey, you want to do the fancy stuff? Like, show me you could do all this stuff perfectly. But I always try to relate it to the sport, not sport specific training, but relating is like when you start to play basketball, you don't just go out there when you're five and jack threes. You're not strong enough all the time to even get to the rim. So you start in a little bit and you work on your form and layups and these type of things. Then you slowly like build your base of skill. It's the same concept in the gym. It's just the way it is. And it's the gym is imperfect, just like sport is. Like I just started two new kids today, a freshman and a sixth grader. And I tell the analogy I always use for my kids is if you were perfect in the weight room or sport, then you would be in the NBA or you wouldn't be here because you're already perfect. So I always tell people, especially basketball, if you're a point guard, you're dribbling the ball, you get bumped and you get off balance. Are you just going to give the ball to the defender and say, hey, good job, man, you can have the ball? Or are you going to throw up a bad shot? Every kid's going to say, I'm going to throw up a bad shot. Well, it's the same thing when it comes to training. If you have a bad rep, if you have something that doesn't look pretty, skipping, karaoke, like locomotion things, if it looks gross, you're just going to stop? No, just keep trying to get better at it. And all I ask is that you do your absolute best job today. Then I coach you, you get a little better, you get a little better, you get a little better, you get a little better. Consistency over time is the key to all of it.
Yeah. That's great. I think that's great feedback. And again, as far as any, usually it's parents that are looking to kind of get someone into strength conditioning. I think a good baseline of where they should be considering or looking to start. And I agree. I think it's something that like it's with all youth sports now that social media as well, that people want to go to whatever looks the fanciest, and so they see someone doing that LeBron James squatting on a Bosu ball, holding a weight, and they're like, well, that trainer did that on Instagram, so I'm going to send my kid there, and right, that kid's going to get injured, right? It's not the same as like, I have kids that like can't do an actual push-up, and it's like, all right, let's start with those basics and go from there, and then, skill-wise, it's a similar thing. Kind of, I think to finish up or to kind of round up some of the things we've been talking about, obviously we talked about skill development, the importance of that. You can be, kind of as strong as you want, but if you don't have the skill, you ain't going to play the sport. Obviously strength kind of being that separator and helping to amplify those skills. Doing all the kind of the 1% things, the good habits, the sleeping right, the eating right. When I think about some of the mental preparation, right? Because that's maybe one of the other things for kids that either make it or don't, or they hit points in their career where they could either kind of push through and persevere, or it might be what prevents them from moving any further. I think injuries are one of those big things that come up. Especially for like high school kids, college kids, they have a huge impact on mental health when you love doing something so much. All of a sudden, you have to pull yourself back and you can't do it. I mean, you mentioned a few of your injuries previously. I know going into our senior year, and it's kind of one of those things that you have all this build up of this is going to be my time and this is my year. A massive foot injury our senior year and had to sit out. Going through that, and I think for me, I've had some injuries, never anything that's kept me out longer for 6 to 8 weeks. So sometimes I feel like it's hard for me to talk about because I understand it to an extent, but I haven't necessarily lived it. For you, a guy that has lived through some of those things, that have had some of those challenges, that have had, kind of the mental hurdles to push through. Now, like you talked about, being in this space and training, how do you help kids with that? How do you help train the mind? What did some of your experience, whether it's basketball as a whole or especially kind of going through some of those injuries, how's it helped you progress now into the trainer you are, and how can you help to kind of impart some of that wisdom to the kids that you're working with?
Yeah, that's a great question because I think sometimes I'm a part-time psychologist. Like I said, when I went on the road with John, I had two athletes that their parents actually paid me to talk to once a week just because of that value uh, that I provided to them, which I never even thought I did. I was, I'm just myself. I talk about my experience. That's the only place I could really talk from. I think, but I think sometimes I challenge a lot of local coaches to do this, and I think it's really hard. I think it's like an art. I think there's Brett Bartholomew. I think that's his last name. He has a book called Art of Coaching, and I do think coaching is art, and I think you have to be able to be soft when needed and hard when needed. And I think coaches, obviously, I get it because if I was a coach, I'd probably be too hard. But I think you have to have an open space where athletes can communicate without sport being a factor. Um, Dr. Ramsey Nijim, who's the head S&C at Kansas, he started doing this, which is really cool, but like in front of the whole team, because obviously Kansas, you get kids from, low income to, the whole spectrum. And he started doing things, simple things pre-workout or whatever, just like, or post-workout as a cool down. Everyone lay on their back, go through some breathing exercises, and then, sit up and let's have a question of the day. And, some of them were like pretty intense, like, hey, what are you most scared of in life? And when you answer that, I mean, we kind of did similar things at Westmont, like where, we were lucky to have a really close team, but like you open the door. And as the coach and the figure, being able to answer that question first opens the door for all your athletes to be able to say, wow, coach just talked about this with me. But to bring it back to I think that's just like a huge thing for coaches to understand is like, I didn't realize I kind of had that. But I think it's just because of like my position. I don't control playing time. I don't control any of that kind of stuff. I'm just a figure that I want the best for you, whoever you are in front of me. That's all I care about. Whether that's sport or whether that's life, I don't care. I just want you to be happy. I want you to have a great life. Like, and however far you can take sports, that's amazing. When I go to my experience though, it wasn't easy. I went through very deep depression, and I think that's why I could speak about it now, and I have a decent sight because, like, I mean, I don't even know if you technically know, but like at Westmont, there was probably a week where I was like pretty suicidal, and I talk about it now openly just because I think it has an impact. But like, obviously, like I tell people all the time there's like a road that I used to drive down to my house, and I would look at that road every night for like a week and be like, man, this isn't it. And I always credit Michael Guzman, who
Yep.
who was our kind of athletic trainer at the time, helper. He was in college with us. He was younger than us by a year. He really is one that, and I've told him this before, and I've said this on a podcast a long time ago. He saved my life, and he's we haven't talked in a long time, but he had a huge impact on my life because he really showed me that there was more to life than sports. At that
Yeah.
time, every young athlete on here is, I want to be in the NBA. I want to go to the biggest college. I want this. I want this. I want that. That's all they think about. We were there. I was there. He showed me that there is so much more to life than that. And it took, going through all that to understand that. And that's a little bit of the approach now that I have with my athletes. is being able to just to one talk to me about my experience. I mean, at Westmont, I was in a boot for I think 2 years of my 4 year career. I don't think I ever played more than 5 games in a season. I don't think I ever think I started one game in my career. Like it wasn't pretty. Like I had,
Yeah.
ankle surgery, foot surgery, hip surgery. It is what it is. But I think just the openness. I think too much of us as coaches, we try to be like hard nosed and what you need. I'm trying to think of like just another example of like a kid. I just had a girl right now, rolled her ankle. Uh, so sad, so devastated. This happened when I was in Japan, and her mom was like, "I can't wait for you to get home because you always have a way of talking to my daughter about getting her out of this headspace." And our conversation really was like, "Okay, let's put this into perspective very quickly. You rolled your ankle. That stinks. I've done that 8 times in my career. The progress from day one to being on crutches or a boot to getting out of that boot and being able to like move your foot and feel okay. That feels like a year,
Yeah.
really 2 weeks. Okay. After you get out of that, we're gonna get to start some weight bearing. That's gonna be about 2 or 3 weeks. But the day that it starts to feel better in each phase of return to play or each phase of uh, health, you never really know when that's going to come. But we've all been through it. Where all of a sudden you wake up and you're like, I could play today, and
Yeah.
that's an amazing feeling. And I think more of my superpower is really just being able to walk athletes through it because I've been through it so many times, and I've now rehabbed so many people. Like I do ACL rehabs, I do all that stuff, which that's a whole nother animal.
Yeah.
But I really just try to be a sounding board of like, there is more to life. And I know that sounds cliche and whatever, but there is like, okay, cool. Let's call it that your basketball career is over. What does that mean? You're gonna quit? You're gonna give up on life? If I would have done that, I wouldn't have a wife. I wouldn't have my 2 kids. I wouldn't have all these amazing things that I have in life that I'm so grateful for. And I think just because I've been through it, I have again a little bit more of an impact and a voice.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I mean, I don't think I think the biggest thing for coaches is being able to have an open space where sport, playing time, like this isn't a part of it. Let's just talk
Yeah.
human to human. And I think I got it from Kevin Hart. Me and my wife talk about it all the time. You obviously have kids, but it's like Kevin Hart, he said, I think it's once a week we're at the table where anything is free game, nobody can get in trouble.
Yeah.
So it'd be like, hey, mom, I went out last night. I snuck out and blah, blah, blah. Cool. Let's talk about it. Right. Because now it takes away that like wall of like, I'm going to get in trouble or I'm going to
Yeah.
do this or I'm going to do that. And I think that's just, I don't know. For me, I think it's just so valuable. Like one of the first questions I always ask my athletes, how are you doing? How are you feeling? I can now, as a coach, when one of your guys walks in the gym, he's having a bad day.
Yeah.
For me, I'm obviously lucky because I'm private. I could just pull them to the side, or as we're warming up, I could check on them. And sometimes those conversations end up being the whole session. But that's what that kid needed that day. They might not need to work out, or maybe
Yeah.
they need a really hard workout that clears their mind. But we could have that back and forth, and we could start to work through it together. And now I'm your ally. And especially as a coach, like, man, when a kid gets hurt, I want you to be back on the court, man. Like you're
Yeah.
valuable to this team. Let me help you through it and let me be a sounding voice for you. And if you absolutely need anything, man, you call me anytime you want. The last thought I have with that, because it just popped in my head, I have a kid that I never knew this was possible. He's called me twice because he was almost going to commit suicide. Never thought I had that impact. He's always just told me, he's like, man, you listen to me. You always, you always have good feedback. And like I said, the feedback I give isn't anything crazy. It's just sometimes people don't have that person to talk to. And again,
Yeah.
for me to revert it, Michael Guzman was that person. Because I think sometimes for me, you yourself, Nate Marsing, our teammate, like it was so hard for me to be around basketball because
Yeah.
I thought basketball betrayed me or I didn't want to do anything with basketball.
Right.
And so like I didn't want to talk to you guys about it because we just had a game and you guys are talking about how I should have played more or this or that. And I'm like, dude, you guys are playing. Like, what are you complaining about? And so you
Yeah.
get in this like, that's a hard mental space. And so at times I feel like I had no one to talk to. Then I went and met Michael. And Michael was like, hanging out in the library, studying, like just making
Yeah.
me laugh. And I'm like, all right, man, this is awesome. Like, this is cool. And so, like, I just think having someone that's there for you, and I think a lot of coaches can be that person because we're with them all the time. Like,
Yeah.
you get so many touch points with each athlete to where, you can start to have that community aspect to where you could, have check-ins with guys. And I mean, because as like as an athlete, like you're not thinking about that. You're not always thinking about like, hey, how's my teammate doing or how's this doing? But especially as a high school kid, man, I was never like,
Yeah.
how you doing, man?
Yeah.
Like I wasn't mature enough for that. But
Yeah.
you could try to set that stage to where, you know, kids are open to be able to talk about some hard things and do some, and be real men. And that's,
Yeah.
I think that's one cool thing that like, Deion Sanders does at Colorado when,
Yeah.
he's
Yeah. For
really
sure.
trying to develop men. And I think a lot of coaches say that, but how does that work? What does that look like? How are you actually, helping men become better men? That you would want your daughter to date or whatever. I have a daughter now. And it's
Yeah.
like, I think a lot about that. Like it's, and that, so I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of how I think through it.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I mean, I think you touched on so many important points. I mean, I think one of those big things is like perspective, and now that like we're retired, like we got wives, we got kids, we're out of the game. It's a little bit easier for us to kind of look back on our career and understand, like, man, like at that moment, it felt so big, but now in the scheme of things, it was just one thing on the journey. And so one, trying to open people's eyes to that, to see the bigger picture, to take them out of kind of that little space they're in, and understand what's happening. But I think to your point as well, like when you're in that, like having someone that will sit down with you and really understand, like that's where you're at. Because I mean, sports has the ability to do a lot of great things. And sometimes, it's because we love it so much that, like you said, you kind of felt like it betrayed you when, you get to these moments, you feel like, all right, this is my time. All of a sudden that's taken away. In the scheme of things, you can know, all right, there's things I can, well, now looking back, I can learn from this, I can grow. But at that point in time, like when your foot breaks, like it's, like you're in that moment, and it's really hard to see out of it. And so I think understanding that for people, I also think that, whether it's internal or external pressures, sometimes like just the mental health of kids around sports, and whether it's what they internally want to do, whether it's what, mom or dad is yelling at them in the car ride home or after the game for their performance like that. Like, unfortunately, there's times where, maybe it doesn't have the positive impact we want. But I think to your point, and the kind of one of the probably the biggest role of a responsibility in a coach is to have that relationship. And, when I think about like my time as a coach now, and some of the conversations that I've been able to have with players that had nothing to do with sports, they went through, some big things in their life, whether it was injuries, whether it was family members who were sick or had passed away, the housing situations, whatever it might be. Like there were some big times where people are just sitting in my classroom and we're chatting for like an hour. And like at the end of the day, if I like reflect back on my time coaching, that's been the most valuable, because that's the most I've been able to help that kid. And it had nothing to do with how many points they scored or what their jump shot looks like. But I think you're hitting the nail right on the head, where as coaches, right, whether it's strength conditioning skills, ahead of a team coach, outside of a parent and, maybe teacher, pastors, like someone like that, like we're going to be the adults that they get to look to and have those relationships with, and have the power to change. And I think, like you said as well, those points of vulnerability, that if kids don't feel like they have a space to come to, or they feel like, oh well, like coach couldn't relate to me, then they're not going to approach you. You're going to miss out on those opportunities. So having that responsibility to make sure that they know that that door is open. There's plenty of ways to do it, and you kind of hit on some great examples. But I mean, I think that's huge, right? And like at the end of the day, it's, you know, we're talking about basketball and strength conditioning and developing kids, right? But all of that, kind of like you're touching on, is an avenue to build people up, to, you know, to care about the human, to have those relationships with. Because yeah, you know, we both played college basketball. You know, we both got jobs now that we have to work to kind of pay the bills. We maybe don't have the same kind of teams anymore, but we got families we got to look after. And that, you know, I think that the big picture of coaching is, can I get someone ready for that? So man, I appreciate it. I appreciate just I mean, the depth. I know from knowing you personally and watching your stuff that you're meticulous and how you prepare for the guys that you train. A whole lot of knowledge that, you know, I'm kind of trying to soak in as we're going through, and I know I'm going to enjoy listening this episode back and soaking some of this in. So I really appreciate you being on. And as far as if anyone's trying to find you, I know you got some online training for those that maybe aren't local to Ventura. If you just want to kind of plug what you've got going on and where the people can find you if they're interested in following up.
Yeah, just pretty much just Instagram, JW Performance, my link in my bio, and have some, you know, other things coming up. Like I said, trying to develop some systems around everything we just talked about. Because I'm not the best at talking about what's in my head all the time. So we're trying to develop some systems that could be free education for athletes. So yeah, JW Performance Instagram, Linktree. We have our 12-week developmental program on there, which is what all of our youth to even like freshmen in high school start with. It's 12 weeks. You could basically just run it back again for 24 weeks. Still going to get great results. And then we have some other stuff coming out pretty soon.
Yeah. All right, man. Well, I appreciate you. It's good to see you. I'm going to be up that way for homecoming weekend in October, so we'll have to try
There
to
you go,
link
man.
up there.
We'll link up for sure.
Yeah. All right, man. It was great
All right,
having
man.
you on.
Appreciate you, bro.
All right. Later, bro.